The Arizona desert stretched for miles, dry and empty like the heart of the man who called it home. Thomas Greaves had once been a husband, a lover, a dreamer, but now he was just a man with a shovel, a gun, and a past he didn't talk about. Ever since the fever took his wife, he had built a wall around his heart, not a wooden one, but the kind that no axe could break. 12 years. That's how long it had been since Thomas last looked a woman in the eye. The townspeople had tried once, long ago, inviting him to church, sending over food, even offering to help fix up the ranch. But after too many silent nods and blank stares, they gave up. They called him the Ghost Rancher, a man who worked from dawn till dusk, spoke to his horses more than humans, and avoided women like they were poison. He liked it that way. The ranch was quiet, predictable, safe. Every day was the same. Feed the horses, mend the fence, ride out to check the herd, and then sit by the fireplace and drink coffee that tasted like ashes. But he never complained. There was no one to complain to. Then came that evening. It was just after sundown. The sky burned orange, and the wind carried the scent of dust and fading cactus blooms. Thomas was oiling his saddle when he heard something that didn't belong. A soft knock. Not on his door, but on the outer gate. He froze. No one knocked on his gate, not in 12 years. Not even the mailman came this far. He stood slowly, every bone creaking like the old wood under his boots. His hand moved to the rifle leaning by the post, but he didn't lift it, not yet. He walked to the gate, squinting against the last rays of sun. 3 figures stood there. Women! Apache. They looked tired. No, exhausted. Dust clung to their dresses, their hair tangled and dry. One of them, younger, looked like she could barely stay on her feet. The eldest stepped forward. Her voice was raspy, but steady. Please, we need shelter. Thomas said nothing. His heart thudded in his chest like a warning drum. He looked at their faces. They weren't just tired, they were afraid, looking back every few seconds like someone might appear behind them. He didn't ask why they were there, didn't ask what happened, didn't ask their names. He just opened the gate and stepped aside. They entered without a word, bowing their heads in quiet thanks. He led them to the barn, laid out some blankets in the loft, brought them water and bread. He didn't speak once. That night, as they slept in the hay, Thomas sat in his cabin staring into the flames. The fire danced, casting long shadows across the room like ghosts from the past. He thought of his wife, of her smile, her laugh, the way she used to leave notes for him tucked under his coffee cup. He hadn't let anyone in since her. Why had he let them in? Something in their eyes, something raw, human and broken. The next morning, the women were still there. They hadn't run, hadn't stolen a thing. Instead, he found the eldest, the same one who'd spoken outside, helping to fetch water. The younger one was tending to the chickens. The middle one, quiet, probably not even 20, was sweeping the porch. He should have told them to leave, but he didn't. Days passed, then a week. They spoke little, only when needed. The eldest introduced herself as Nayli. The other 2 were Kiona and Simi, sisters from the north. Thomas didn't press. They told him little, and he asked even less. Still, the silence between them wasn't cold. It wasn't like the emptiness that had haunted the ranch for years. It was soft, respectful. At night, they cooked over the fire in the yard, humming strange lullabies, songs that reminded Thomas of things he didn't want to feel. One evening, as he sat nearby cleaning his boots, he caught himself watching them laugh. Real, free laughter. And it made his chest ache. He had forgotten what laughter sounded like, and maybe, just maybe, he missed it. One night a storm came, harsh winds, flashing skies, thunder that shook the ground. The women were in the barn and Thomas couldn't sleep. He walked to the door, looked out, and saw Simmy, the youngest, sitting outside, soaked and crying. Without thinking, he grabbed his coat and walked into the rain. He sat beside her. "You all right?" he asked, his first words to a woman in 12 years. She looked up, eyes wide, then slowly nodded. "Just scared," she whispered. "Me too," he said, barely above the rain. They sat in silence. But something had changed. From that night on, he spoke a little more. Not much, but enough. Enough to ask Nayeli if she needed more blankets. Enough to ask Kiona if the hens were laying. Enough to say, "Stay safe," before riding off to check the herd. The walls he had built so carefully, brick by brick, began to crack. But he still didn't ask why they were there, until the day he saw tracks, boot prints. 6 of them, heavy, coming from the west, the same direction the women had come from, and they stopped at the edge of the property, turned around. Someone was looking for them. Thomas cleaned his rifle that night. He didn't say a word to the women, didn't want to scare them, but he moved his cot closer to the door. Something told him this wasn't over. The next morning, Nayeli came to the porch, her face calm but firm. "You know, don't you?" Thomas nodded. She sat beside him, folding her hands. "We escaped a government camp. The men there—" She looked away, jaw tight. "They were cruel. We ran. Didn't think we'd make it. Then we found you." Thomas didn't speak, but something inside him shifted. Maybe they were running from danger. Maybe bringing them in had put him in danger too. But for the first time in 12 years, he didn't care. He just looked out across the desert and said quietly, "You're safe here." And in that moment, under the morning sun and the endless sky, the silent rancher was silent no more. After that morning on the porch, something changed between Thomas and the 3 women. The silence between them no longer felt like a barrier. It felt like trust. The kind of trust that doesn't need many words. Each day, the ranch grew more alive. Kiona mended the torn curtains and fixed the old rocking chair by the porch. Simmy, though young, proved herself a gifted caretaker for the horses, whispering to them like they were old friends. Nayeli, always calm, always watching, worked the garden like she had lived on the land forever. And Thomas, he found himself changing. He began waking up before the rooster just to brew extra coffee. 1 for himself, 3 more cups left quietly on the barn table. He no longer ate in silence. He sat outside in the evenings, listening to the soft hum of Apache songs drifting in the breeze. Sometimes he even chuckled at Simmy's stories about wild horses, desert spirits, and her dream to see the ocean. But the peace couldn't last forever. One dusty afternoon, as Thomas was chopping wood near the fence, he spotted something in the distance. 3 men on horseback. He narrowed his eyes. These weren't ranchers. They weren't from town either. Their movements were sharp, searching, deliberate. They weren't just passing through. Thomas didn't approach them. He walked back to the cabin, calm on the outside, but every step filled with quiet tension. That night, after dinner, he cleaned his rifle by the fire. Nayeli watched from across the yard. The flames danced in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "They've found us, haven't they?" Thomas didn't answer right away. He simply nodded. She sat beside him, folding her hands in her lap. "They won't leave us alone," she whispered. "We broke away from something they control, and men like that, they don't like losing control." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I figured," he said. Nayeli looked over, her voice softer. "You don't have to get involved. We'll leave by sunrise. You've done enough." But Thomas shook his head. "No, you're not running again." She blinked. "You don't even know us, Thomas." He looked at her, eyes firm. "I know enough." He stood, picked up his rifle, and walked into the dark, toward the barn, toward the road, toward whatever was coming next. The next day, the men returned. This time they came straight to the gate. 3 of them, dusty coats, cold eyes. The leader was tall, with a scar stretching across his left cheek. He didn't bother to smile. "We're looking for 3 Apache girls, runaways from the federal camp near Tucson," the man said, resting a hand on the butt of his pistol. "Heard they passed through here." Thomas stood firm, rifle in hand, not aimed. Yet. "Didn't see anyone," he said plainly. The man narrowed his eyes. "Funny. That barn smells like stew and horsehair. You sure you're not hiding something, old man?" Thomas didn't flinch. "I said what I said." The leader chuckled darkly. "Now listen, we've got orders. These girls aren't just runaways. They're property of the state. They broke laws." "Then go get a warrant," Thomas replied coldly. The man leaned in closer. "We don't need a warrant when dealing with savages. Now move aside." That's when Thomas lifted his rifle. "I don't think you understand," he said slowly. "You walk past this gate, you won't be walking back." The three men hesitated. They hadn't expected resistance, especially not from an aging rancher. But in Thomas's eyes there was no fear. There was something more dangerous. Conviction. A long, tense silence followed. Then the leader spat in the dirt and turned his horse. "You'll regret this, Greaves." Thomas didn't respond. He waited until they disappeared into the horizon. Then he lowered his rifle and exhaled. Behind him, the three women had been watching. Simi ran to him first, tears in her eyes. Kiona followed, wrapping her arms around his waist. But it was Naily who said it first. "You didn't have to protect us." Thomas looked at her, voice low. "I wanted to." From that day on, they stopped being guests. They became family. The women moved into the cabin, helping with repairs, painting old walls, and building a new hen house. Thomas taught Kiona how to shoot, just in case. Simi read every book he had, sometimes out loud, while Thomas sat on the porch and carved wood. Naily became something more than just company. One night, by the fire, she sat beside him, closer than ever before. "You lost someone too," she said softly. Thomas nodded. "My wife." She waited. "Fever took her, long time ago." Naily didn't say anything. She just placed her hand over his, warm, gentle, present. For a long while they sat like that, not speaking. But no words were needed. Months passed. The ranch flourished. The women planted herbs, painted the barn red, and even carved patterns into the porch posts. Travelers passing by would often stop, curious about the sudden life in the once lonely property. But none dared bother them. Thomas smiled more. He laughed. He danced once, awkwardly, during a night of music and stories by the fire. Simi had pulled him up, and he'd shuffled his boots until he gave up and just stood there clapping, red-faced but happy. And one evening, as the stars came out, he looked around at the flickering lights in the windows, the smell of bread from the oven, the soft sound of Naily's voice humming in the next room, and realized something. He wasn't alone anymore, not just in the house, but in his heart. One morning, Thomas rode into town for supplies. The clerk, surprised to see him smiling, asked, "You finally got help on the ranch?" Thomas just nodded. "Family," he said. And that was all he needed to say. That night, Naily brought him a carved wooden pendant, shaped like a hawk. "In our stories," she said, "the hawk is the spirit that guards those who are wounded. It sees everything from above, protects without needing." Thomas took it carefully, running a finger over the smooth edges. "I don't need a spirit to protect me," he said with a soft smile. "I have you." Naily blushed, and in the quiet warmth of the fire, their hands found each other again. This time he didn't let go. The silent rancher who hadn't spoken to a woman in 12 years now lived among three. And they didn't just change his home, they healed his soul. He saved them from danger, but in truth, they saved him from himself.